Can everyone hear me okay? Yes, I might actually do that. That might be a bit easier. Great. So, as you guys all probably know, inclusion solutions have 9 pillars of inclusion. Today I'm going to focus on 2 of them. I'm going to focus on policy and access. The reason I've picked these is because they seem like the easy choice for local government, and that's because as a local government, or as any local government or public authority in the room, we all have a requirement to have a disability access and inclusion plan, which covers your access and your policy. But I want to talk about how the City of Joondalup has reframed the way we think about our requirements. So we include social inclusion in the mindset of our organization, and we're not just meeting our legislative requirement, we're going above and beyond. So the City of Joondalup started this shift with internal education. We started talking about how access and inclusion is more than just disability access. We branded a message of accessible and inclusive communities for everyone, and we carried and promoted that message since 2012 through all of our external messages on our access and inclusion plan, as well as internally. We have done different campaigns on it, and it's a consistent theme of branding to help people understand that when we talk about access and inclusion, we're talking about more than just disability access. So when we talk about access and inclusion, who are we talking about? We're talking about people with disability. We're talking about parents with prams and young children, seniors and older people, people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, mental health conditions, just to name a few. So we're reframing who we're talking about to get a greater organizational buy-in. We do this because more people in the organization can relate to the people that we're talking about. Most people have a grandparent or an elderly parent. You know, a lot of us have young children or friends with young children. It's easier for people to understand and to have that buy-in. So, are we there yet as the City of Joondalup? The city has staff that have a great organizational understanding of our obligations under the Access and Inclusion Plan. They understand the related policies. They have a shared responsibility of implementing and reporting on our plan. They have a keen interest in accessibility-based projects, and that's not just the community development team. I find consistently across the organization, I have people that are coming to me with ideas or have a lot of questions and have a real genuine interest in improving access and inclusion in the community. We also have a lot of training opportunities and education opportunities for staff. So I'd like to take this time to go into more detail about the pillars of access and policy. So the first pillar I'll talk about is policy, and it includes the principles of values, contribution, and responsibility. So the City of Joondalup's values are to be transparent, accountable, honest, ethical, respectful, sustainable, and professional. This is in all the work that we do, not just our access and inclusion plan, but it does relate very naturally to the work that our community development team does, especially in access and inclusion. So all of these values align with our access and inclusion plan and our access and equity policy, as well as any other related corporate documents that are not always a super exciting read. And it relates to how the city implements their access and inclusion plan. We really do try and go beyond the legislative requirements. There's 7 domains that we're required to meet, but we really try to make sure that our action items are genuine and actually make a difference in the community. So we remain true to our corporate values through our implementation and reporting processes. And we try to remain transparent. And we do this by an internal document. We have an implementation plan that's attached to our access and inclusion plan. It's been prepared to provide a clear breakdown of measurable actions and areas of responsibility, as well as a time frame in which those actions need to be completed by. It gets approved at an executive level, so we have buy-in from the decision makers of the organization. They're giving their stamp of approval for these action items. We meet with everyone, team leaders, coordinators, managers, to discuss the plan as it's being made, to make sure they're comfortable with those actions and it's something that their teams can implement. And the Access and Inclusion Officer works very closely with all of the other business units to ensure that they're items are achievable. We have quarterly check-ins to make sure that things are progressing the way that they should. I'm available to assist people if they're not achieving their actions the way that they should be or in the time frame that they should be. Managers also provide me an annual report on all of their actions, which we lodge with disability services at the end of the year. So even if we've agreed to actions and they haven't been completed or they've been completed and they're not successful, we also report on those and we give an explanation as to why it didn't work and how we can improve moving forward, and that's part of that transparency for us. So it's through the process of joint planning, implementation, and reporting that we carry out our responsibilities of access and inclusion in line with our corporate values. So contribution is the second part of the policy pillar. So how do we get the greatest contribution from our organization? City of Joondalup has many business units and over 600 staff, and we work in everything from outdoor areas to community development and everything in between. So the way that I find I get the greatest contribution is that I build relationships. I build them within and inside and outside of the organization. I make note of feedback, whether it's formal or informal, whether it comes from a community member, a service provider, somebody within our organization. I try and remember those passing comments. Somebody may not have given formal feedback, but they make a comment that I think, oh, that might be worth hanging on to. I keep in touch with community members that I meet along the way. We get a lot of people coming to us asking for small requests. Can you lower a pram ramp in my neighborhood, or can you cut a curb so I can get around? I keep in touch with those people, so when it comes time to designing projects or doing consultation for access and inclusion, I can get in touch with them and say, do you want to contribute to this? More often than not, valuable contributions are made through conversations and relationships, so it's really important to keep that in mind. Remember that no contribution is too small. Some suggestions people make may seem insignificant to you, but they could make a very big difference in the life of somebody who has barriers to inclusion. You need to notice your champions. Take note of people who may ask a lot of questions about access and inclusion, who may make a lot of comments or suggestions. Often it's those people that if you feel their interest and their passion, they will be your champions in projects that you need to get off the ground. So responsibility is the next, pillar, or the next principle of the pillar. So all city staff are responsible for the access and inclusion plan. It is the community development team that takes the lead on writing and reporting, but we have action items that go across all business units. And as mentioned before, we have a lot of meetings with managers and at the executive level to make sure that they are willing to take responsibility for the things that we're asking them to do. Some other things that we do we ensure that the action items in our access and inclusion plan are integrated into our business plans and our budgets for the relevant business unit, so we know we'll have the means to carry them out. And we do new staff inductions for every new staff. They have to undergo an access and inclusion induction within their first 3 months, so they understand the responsibilities we have under our access and inclusion plan, and more importantly, they understand that message of accessible and inclusive communities for everyone, that it's not just disability access. We also provide 2 sessions of disability awareness training for staff. We target it to different business units, so it's specific to the work that they do. We might do one for our events team on accessible events, or do one for outdoor workforce if you're setting up a work site and coordinating off sidewalks. How do you do that in a way that's not going to inconvenience people? So this training is really thorough. It's a 1-day course. It's the impact of disability on a person's life, awareness of positive contributions of people with disability, how to design accessible and inclusive communities, and it also talks a lot about your invisible disabilities or other barriers to participation. So it talks about dementia, mental health, people from cold backgrounds, people who are experiencing homelessness. So it really promotes that message of we're trying to include everybody, not just people with disability. We found that this training goes a really long way in gaining staff support to implementing our access and inclusion plan. The way the training is delivered, it's by an external organization. People seem to gain a really genuine interest in access and inclusion after taking this training, which those people then become your champions. So next I'm going to talk about the the pillar of access, which includes functional, physical, and social access. I'm going to do it a little bit differently and talk about two stories. They're two recently completed projects that the city has done. They were not access and inclusion-based stories and projects, and they were not driven by the community development team. They were actually done by other teams and happened very organically because of that message of accessible and inclusive communities and that philosophy within the city of Joondalup that carries through. So we redeveloped a lot of buildings. We recently rebuilt the club rooms at Pennystone Park in Greenwood. I sit on our project teams to provide generalized access advice, but that's more around, no, that toilet is too small or that ramp is not compliant. This one was really interesting because they went well above and beyond what our regular requirements would be, and they really fostered a physical and functional space for people of all abilities. The club rooms have your standard accessible toilets, but they also have a adult changing room that's comparable to changing places. It has a lift, a hoist, the toilet. It's not accredited though, so it's not a changing places. But it is comparable, and that wasn't my idea. That actually came from one of the directors that was on that project team, and he thought if we had something like that, people have more opportunity to participate, whether it be watching sport or participating in the club. But there's a play group that also leases that space. All of the outdoor areas are fully accessible. So we've got it's hard to see in that photo, but you've got an accessible barbecue that has an angled underneath, so you've got leg clearance for people that are seated, and the picnic bench has a half seat on one side, so people can sit there as well if they're using a walker or a wheelchair, if they have a guide dog, something along those lines. I really need like an aerial photo of it. All of the footpath connections from the building throughout the park and to the sporting fields are connected and completely accessible. Has a nature playground with accessible equipment as well. So really, anyone of any ability would have the full opportunity to play on the playground, use the barbecue and picnic space, watch sports, participate in the play group that's attached, or be a part of that club in whatever manner they wanted to be. So it's a really fantastic facility, and I was just so impressed that all of that happened without my advice or me saying, you guys should really be thinking about this or that. It just happened, and it's a really impressive facility. Social access. So our arts and culture team runs a program called the Community Art Exhibition. It's where local or amateur artists in different categories are invited to submit their artwork to the city. It's publicly displayed, and they have an opportunity to sell their art, and then there's awards at the end of it. The gentleman that won the student category is named Chris. He dropped his work off at the city, and he said, I'm Chris, this is my artwork, I have special needs, and that's all of the information he gave us. I wasn't aware of this until he actually won the student art category. He didn't win because we were doing him any favors because he has a disability. He won because he was the best in that category, and his art was really quite impressive. So once he won, the lady running the project came to me and said, look, we have somebody with a disability that's won. We're not sure of the nature of his disability, and we want to make sure he's going to be comfortable at the award ceremony, and he's going to be able to participate with all of the other winners. How do we do that? I found it excellent that they were able to come to me and say, look, we want to do this. How do we make it work for this individual? I give them a little bit of advice. They spoke to Chris's parents and respectfully asked about his disability and what will work for him at this function. How can we make this work for him? We had to alter very little to the way that we do things because it was already being run in a way that was accessible and inclusive. So there was very little we had to do for Chris to make this a good experience for him, which was absolutely fantastic. During Chris's acceptance speech of his award, he did announce to the crowd that he had special needs, his words, and I actually think that was really great because it brought an awareness to the rest of the community of the contributions of somebody with disability and that they're just as valued and just as talented as the rest of the artists that were competing in this field. So that was I think a very, very good outcome. Chris's mom then wrote into the city after the event to thank us, and I'd just like to read what she wrote because it really highlights that we didn't have to do anything special or really go to the way because of the way we already run our events and programs. So this is from Chris's mum. This is just to say thank you so much to everyone at the City of Joondalup for such a lovely evening. Thank you to your care in ensuring Chris would be okay receiving his award and he wouldn't be overwhelmed. This event helped Chris in so many ways, most of all inclusion in the community, and we will remember this for a long, long time. So this feedback to our team was very important. It really highlighted that we're getting it right. We still have a long way to go, as do most other local governments, but I think we are on a good path of creating that accessible and inclusive community. So in closing, when I was writing my notes for this, I was asked to focus on only 2 of the 9 pillars, and I found it really difficult to stay on topic. But then I realized it's because when you have good policy and good practice and good knowledge of why access and inclusion is important, the other things fall into place. The other philosophies of all the other pillars happen organically, and the 2 stories I shared are just examples of how those things happen more organically. So I would just like to reiterate, as the Access and Inclusion Officer, I didn't spearhead those projects and I didn't push those projects. They just happened, which is always something I want to see in my role. And that concludes. Any questions? No? Thank you.